5, 6, 7, 8.
Hi EXers, welcome to the EX podcast episode number 51. This is your host, Stefan Vincent. I'm here today with you because we need to shake things up in the world of HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, and company culture in order to create positive employee experiences in our organizations. Your workplace doesn't have to be a dreadful place where employees feel disengaged. This podcast brings a different lens to the HR, employee engagement, and company culture conversation. We approach these topics from a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Our guests, all thought leaders and disruptors in the EX space in their own way, come to this show to share best practices on the key elements that foster employee engagement and strengthen company culture, and also to spark the conversation on how to create those positive employee experiences. Not every company can do what Airbnb or Google do around their employee experience, and this is what this show is all about. Sharing stories of companies of all sizes, not only to show that EX doesn't require a large budget or a large team, but also that there isn't one recipe. Each company can find its own way through the EX journey. Today's guest is Sam Crumley, Vice President of Employee Experience at Panopto. Today with Sam we will talk about what are some basic questions HR leaders should ask themselves when considering investing in any type of employee engagement tool. Why organizations fail to adopt video content to engage with their employees, while many companies have been successful leveraging video content to engage with consumers. What are the basic steps companies should follow to invest in and to develop good video content? How companies can efficiently develop, manage, and distribute content with all these considerations? And what metrics should companies consider to measure engagement, consumption, and return on investment when it comes to internal communications? This episode is brought to you by Fusion Alliance. Fusion Alliance delivers holistic solutions fusing together data, digital, and technology to redefine customer experiences and move your ideas to execution. That's why businesses across multiple industries have relied on Fusion's expertise and partnership for over 25 years. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Sam. If you get a chance, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. And last thing, if you want to send me feedback, suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the EX podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Sam Crumley. Sam is calling from Seattle, and he's the Vice President of Employee Experience at Panopto, the fastest growing provider of video software for training, teaching, and presenting. Sam, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a very easy question. Who is Sam?
One of my favorite topics. Like you said, my role here is Vice President of Employee Experience. And what that allows me to do in my role is I span what you would traditionally think of as HR, but also other elements that impact the employee experience. So physical environment, for example. And I came to this role actually after several years of consulting work. I worked for a fantastic company here in Seattle called People Firm, which is dedicated to consulting with companies solely around people practices. So that gave me a great insight into a lot of different companies with some great solutions that I now bring here as the person in charge of it.
So what is Panopto? And the name is quite unusual. So what does it mean?
Actually, it's from Latin. So pan meaning all or across, and then opto meaning seen. So the idea is Panopto is our mission is to help anyone share knowledge through video.
So many recent reports such as Gallup, Deloitte, Steelcase, and others show that the employee engagement is at an all-time low. And many companies try to address that, investing in softwares or apps with the intent to boost employee engagement, but with no clear plan or methodology, and simply because decisions are often driven by HR and IT, and we all know that they're not specifically people-centric. So what happens is that employees don't use those tools because the user experience sucks somewhere. So what are some of the basic questions HR leaders should ask themselves when considering these types of investments?
Yeah, I think that really starts with the underlying drivers of engagement, rather than just saying engagement is this one thing, but look at, I think about it in 5 elements, and this is part of my consulting background, but the idea that engagement is driven by 5 main areas. One is there clarity and connection with the company strategy? Is there an engaging and authentic culture? Is the structure of the organization getting in the way of people really being fully engaged? Are performance expectations and all of the people practices aligned to engage people? And finally, is it easy for people to get work done? So if you look across strategy, culture, structure, people, and work, where is it that you're really having the roadblocks to increased engagement? And at Panopto, I do a survey every year that gets at each of those 5 elements. And then based on the findings, that's when you start thinking about what technology to use, because the technology needs to be fit for purpose. It has to actually influence one of those factors or drivers of engagement, rather than just say, we have an engagement problem, let's get some engagement software. And then once you understand what the underlying drivers are and what levers you can pull, that's when you start thinking about the user. So how would a technology solution be used by an individual inside the organization to overcome that roadblock that's hindering greater engagement?
So, from your past experience working with and consulting with many different companies, who should be in charge of the company culture and driving the employee experience, in your opinion?
In my opinion, no one person owns culture or engagement. The primary owner of engagement should rest on the direct manager. So how do you make a manager or a leader or a supervisor a better steward and driver of engagement? And that's often one of the toughest things in a company, especially when you have newly promoted managers or emerging leaders in the organization who have never really thought about this before. And how do you get them enabled, engaged, ready to be that catalyst or that accelerator of engagement?
Yeah, and it's a tough one because obviously, it has to be driven and sponsored and championed from the top by executives, right? But also, oftentimes, many different stakeholders in the organization drive or manage parts and pieces of the entire employee journey or life cycle. And oftentimes there are some either discrepancies, inconsistencies, or just those different stages are managed in silos from, let's say, recruiting, who may do a good job at bringing new employees to the organization, to the onboarding process, usually managed by HR, and then when the employee starts, the employee is handled or is moved to a manager, right? So through all of those different stages, there may be a lack of consistency in the experience. So how do you see this? Because clearly, in terms of engagements, people are usually excited when they start working in the company. But then as soon as they report and they start working with the manager, depending on the relationship that is established at that time, they may have some different feelings about how the experience is going to be versus what they thought it would be when they joined the company. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And when we enter into a recruitment process, we start with the basic principle that engagement starts the minute somebody even learns about our company. Mm-hmm. So the experience of tying our employment brand that we transmit outward through our website, through our recruiting, and through our engagement in conferences and local events, all of that has to translate into what actually happens when they show up on day one. So what we drive is a consistency between the talking points we use with recruiters to what actually happens on the job, to what your onboarding plan looks like, and then what your career development, performance management, and learning experiences are going forward. And the cool thing that we have the advantage of which all of our customers have the advantage of, is to use video throughout that process. So we can not only have handouts or bullet points on our website, but show people and represent authentically what it really is like, how we talk, how we engage with each other, how we talk about our product, how we talk about our customers. All of those things can be additionally driven and consistent because they're coming from the mouths of our actual employees. So when somebody starts, one of the first things they do is they watch a video of our CEO talking about our brand promise. And that is the core of everything we do here. We're a very customer-focused company. So everything that somebody experiences ties back to that core mission, our core leadership principles and values.
So let's talk a little bit about this. When it comes to internal communications, very few companies do a good job at creating and distributing compelling and engaging content to the employees. So email updates, staff meetings, basic newsletter have very poor engagement rates most of the time. And what's interesting is that video content has become a predominant communication tool for consumer brands to engage with their customers. However, companies fail to adopt video content to engage with their employees. So it sounds like you do a good job internally at Panopto, but you try to help your customers doing this. But what are some of the basic steps that companies should take when they consider building engaging content for the employees?
Absolutely. I'll comment on both of those. One is what it is that's causing the failure, and also how to overcome that. So where I've seen it fail in terms of a company initiative to push video is often forgetting to treat the employee as the consumer of that video. So the idea is when you're trying to get somebody to watch anything, the first thing you have to think of is, why would they watch it? What is it that they would be getting out of it? And is there value in using their time for video communication? Funny thing about that is, just like watching or listening to a podcast, time can always be changed with the 1x, 2x playback speed. So it's always funny when I post a video, I'm pretty sure that most of my employees are watching it at 2x speed. But I'm okay with that as long as they're watching it. The second consideration there is, would the employee be missing out if they don't watch it? So there's an idea of, if you're using a video communication as a primary or even a secondary tool, is there something that an employee would miss if they didn't watch it? Or would there be something that their coworkers know or have experienced that they would feel like they're missing out on? That's another way to drive people to use video, or at least get over that initial hurdle. When it comes to investing in video technology, there are people that get nervous. They get nervous because they're worried that the videos won't be very good. They get worried that there'll be things in the videos that will create risk. They're worried that any number of things could fail, and then video gets a bad reputation going forward. So where I see it is starting first in using video, start with the content. So what is it that you're really trying to convey? And get the basics right around creating videos. Don't worry about, is it studio quality? Is the production value good, really great? Is it, television level quality? That's not really worth the time and the effort. What's worth the time and the effort is making sure you get the content right and it's compelling. And then you can, as a organization or as a administrator or an executive or a learning and development professional, you can curate that content. So start eliminating things that are not viewed. So all of the most relevant stuff keeps refreshing to the top, and really just coach people on how do I use video to do effective knowledge transfer? How do I do it to get people excited about what they're watching? But stopping short of actually giving everyone acting lessons to make great video.
When you look at the employee life cycle, from being a candidate to the onboarding process to the training and development, as we discussed earlier, video content can play a big part in driving high engagement. And the way we consume content is very different from a decade ago. So nowadays, whether it's training, internal communications, employees consume content in different ways. They expect on-demand content on their preferred device via multiple channels. So how companies efficiently develop, manage, and distribute content with all those different considerations?
Absolutely. And the core of it is to have a flexible, easy to use platform, so it's less intimidating. But once you have that, like I said before, you can have a great tool, but nobody uses it. Mm-hmm. What I've seen work really well, and I keep reinforcing this, is to not push the solution. When you're starting with adoption or thinking about ways to use video and other ways to drive engagement, it's the idea of putting it in the hands of the user. And every company has some early adopter who, if you said, "Hey, we're testing this out. Would you mind playing around with it for a while and telling us what you think?" So there's a usability piece there. The other is, if you make something available, it's amazing the kinds of uses that people think of that you would never have thought of as a use case. So we've seen organizations use video for purposes outside of what they originally scoped it to be, because the users liked it so much that they started using it in new and different ways. So you get people even more excited about using it, and you didn't even have to do anything. You just put it in the hands of the users, kept it a simple tool, fit for multiple types of purposes, and let them drive it. It's those early adopters are the ones that will get it kind of snowballing through the organization, and get people excited and be more creative, right? You can't force creativity, but you can give them the opportunity for it.
So when you work with companies and you discuss about their needs and how your software could help them define their goals for internal communications and employee engagements, I would assume that companies are at different stages in maturity around how they can use video content. I would imagine that some companies have very sophisticated equipment and others don't have barely, almost no equipment at all. Does it require a lot of equipment or high standard equipment to start video content, or can anyone start with even just a mobile phone and a quick editing software on a laptop?
Yeah, I think most of the equipment that we're giving our employees now is video enabled. So my laptop has a camera, a webcam built in, mm-hmm. speakers, microphone. I can create a video at home. I can create it at the airport. I can create it in my office. Those are the ones that are really effective for clear and direct communication. But it also works if you have a formal training room with a camera and built-in audio and speaker mics and presentations. All of those can be incorporated. So depending on the purpose, you have equipment at your hands that you can use for anything. And then if you're stepping that up, it can go from there. A use case, or the reason that Panopto was founded was for university lecture capture. So that's one area where there's a clear use. There's an instructor, there's a PowerPoint, there's audio, there's video, and you want the students to be able to play that back in search. So find terms and where different things were mentioned in that video. So that's one case. If you're using it on the factory floor to train somebody on how to use a new piece of equipment, there again, all you really need is a handheld camera watching the person doing the work. So all of the technology and hardware is there in some form, fashion, or another, depending on what you're going to be using it for.
And the way we consume and we digest content has changed over the past 5-10 years, I would say. Now people no longer stay in classrooms for an hour or 2 hours being trained on something very specific. It's more about fragmented content that is easily accessed on demand whenever, wherever. Mm-hmm. So how do you break down content so that it's appealing and engaging enough, but informational enough as well, even in smaller pieces?
Yeah, I think in that case, whether you call it micro learning or whatever other term you put on it, what you're really talking about is what does somebody need to be able to do their job. So if it's if it's an industry that's manufacturing or hardware, there's a clear idea of these are the tasks that need to be performed. Let's just chop that up into individual videos. The other is, going back to the core of instructional design. What are the learning objectives? How can you best achieve those objectives for the learner, and segment that up? So if you think about a soft skills training course, there's the idea of, there's an introduction, there are a set of skills and behaviors and competencies that you can segment out. So how do you create a curriculum or a learning path with videos that achieve the same results as if you have a structured instructional outline for a course? That's one thing when you're thinking about translating how we normally consume, or how we've traditionally consumed learning, to how we can consume it on today's platforms and mobile devices. The other is sometimes you don't need an hour-long course. If you are really trying to get somebody to learn it, the best way to do it is to show. So you can tell people all about something, but video allows you to actually show somebody what that looks like. So if I'm talking to my employees about how to do open enrollment, I'll just take a 3-minute video walking them through the steps instead of handing out 3 pages describing what the process is. So video truly allows you to show and not tell.
Can you explain me a little bit how your software works when it comes to distributing content?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our platform is end to end. So it starts with the recording software to actually capture. Then we have editing software, or it's all one piece, but it's part of the platform, to edit, to switch out feeds if you had multiple video feeds, or if you had a PowerPoint, or you want to replace a PowerPoint in the presentation. So you go through the editor, and then once you publish content, that goes into a video content management system, or VCMS, or you can think of it as a private YouTube library, where then the content can be curated You can create playlists. You can segment into different departments, different folders within departments to organize the content. And then you can also manage visibility. So who should have access to which videos, who should it be pushed to versus who has access to search for it. And then the idea is, as on the admin side, you're trying to push the content you want people to see as high up the page as possible, but you also want to make everything searchable for when somebody knows what they're looking for and can be able to find it.
And so do you pick from the platform, do you pick the channels that you want to go through to distribute the content?
Yep. We can decide that, whether it's based on location or department or any other dimension that you want to create. And then you can also use videos, you can use them embedded. So if you already have a learning management system, or you already have an intranet page where you want to embed videos, you can also use it in that case as well. So you're not having to have a different video solution to create learning content on your LMS that's SCORM compliant, and you don't have to have a different solution if you want to put a video on your website or your LinkedIn profile or any of those things. So you can use a embedded video. So
beyond training and doing some presentations, how do you see video content being used with some of your customers?
Yeah, obviously training and knowledge transfer is the primary use case. We also have seen it used for project work or handoffs between teams. So once something is complete and it goes from let's say it goes from the build team or the development team to the run team, video is a good way to illustrate all of the background and history and why decisions were made and why it looks the way it does to the new team that's taking that over. We've seen it used for sales enablement. You have a new product, then all of the global sales team needs to understand what's different about that product, what the value prop of the product is, how to demo that product. So sales enablement training. And we've also seen it used just for general kind of cultural use, where people are using it to share, across countries or between offices where you don't have a lot of physical presence, but you can use video to kind of reinforce those cultural connections. So I like to tell people that the use cases are virtually endless. Somebody's going to think of something new and some other way to use it that's both productive and valuable and engaging inside of a company.
Like in marketing, there are expectations in terms of measuring engagements, consumption, and the return on investments when it comes to internal communications. So what metrics should companies consider when they want to implement video content and video distribution?
Well, we actually have some pretty cool calculators for that. You can find those on our website. But what is the return on investment is the question that always comes up when people are trying to make the decision to adopt a video solution. And there are many different components to what goes into that return on investment, where it comes to time to productivity, increased engagement, reduced administrative time, reduced system administration time. So there's a business value and a return on investment part of the decision. But then when you're actually using video, there's different measures that you might not have thought before. So one clear one is viewing. So how do you measure the consumption of video? Whether that's viewing hours or number of people accessing video, or number of times a video is viewed. And then you can get even further down into it and say, I have this 4-minute video, but everyone keeps rewatching at 2.5 minutes. Why is it that everyone keeps rewatching that section of the video? Is it that there's something not clear about it? Is that we covered a topic, too quickly? Is it that really that's the only part of the video people care about. So then you kind of dig into the deeper components of use and measurement that gets beyond what you normally would see at the end of a learning activity, which is the happy sheet or the level 1 or level 2 survey saying, did you like this content or is this useful to your job? But you actually see that people are using it. And the other thing, now that we're actually switching into more of a social method of training and knowledge transfer, are the discussion threads around that video. So what are people asking? How many times are people commenting on a specific section? How many questions are raised in those discussion threads? So there's a social aspect of how engaging your video content is, and then ultimately, if you're using the video for sales enablement, are you driving more sales? If you're using the video for onboarding, are people becoming productive earlier in that onboarding cycle? So there are the business metrics that are actually being impacted by using video.
Do you mostly work with departments or teams in charge of learning and development, or do you work across multiple teams within organizations, such as HR, marketing, employee branding, recruiting?
Yeah, and again, that varies depending on the size and maturity of the organization. It could be a individual responsible for learning and development for thousands of employees, and they're trying to find out the more efficient and cost-effective way to do that. Or it could be inside of a compliance function. So where you have a highly regulated industry that needs to make sure everyone has the same information and is trained and enabled and ready from a compliance perspective. And then it can go from there. IT is always involved from a system integration, infrastructure, authentication, user sign-in, those types of things. But it could be that we get a very excited head of operations that just wants to use it for their group. And usually what happens is they do use it, they get excited, other people find out about it, and then want it for their group as well.
Earlier you were talking about, as an example of training, a worker on the production floor being trained and learning on how to use a new tool, for instance. Do you see virtual reality as an extension of video content and people being able actually to sort of practice hypothetically using a new tool or a new software, whatever it might be? Do you see VR as an extension or replacement of video training?
I think of it as an extension. If you think about VR or gamification, those are really taking video to a next level. So if you think about I actually had a manager of field operations for a natural gas company complain that all their new hires were just going on YouTube and finding videos instead of using the knowledge that was ingrained. It's been sitting in all of these very experienced professional, and it came back to, well, one thing about video is if you just stick with the positive use case or the positive result, you're not getting the value of that knowledge transfer. So the more that you can enhance that experience and say, this is not only how it works when everything goes well, but here are the 45 ways that it could fail. And so I think by creating your own and curating your own video content or VR tools or any type of gamification where people have to make decisions inside of that experience, you get at more of what are all those other pieces of knowledge that we could embed inside of this experience besides just the positive, successful outcome.
Yeah, because I would say traditional learning and training that many of us have been through years ago was just sitting in classrooms. It was all very theoretical. Right? There might be some games or some practices, hands-on tasks to do, but most of the time it was very theoretical. Now with the video content, you get a bit more reality into, you can use video actually to show how something works, or maybe it just doesn't work, as you were saying earlier, but there's no actual practice around it either, right? Or even someone practices using a new tool, for instance, it's a bit harder for people to see exactly, if that employee is doing it well or not, unless there's someone watching that person right away. So do you see VR as a way to not only experiment virtually something new to learn, but also to measure if that person is doing it effectively?
Yeah, I think some of those tools are a little ways off, but if you think about as a learner, being able to practice, you hit on it earlier, where we used to do things like role play inside of a classroom, which I don't know anyone that really likes to do that. But when you take it and put it in the hands of the individual in a safe environment and let them experiment, that's a really great way to do it. And actually, that's another use case for video before jumping all the way to designing a VR experience, is recording the user in performing their tasks. So it's like the instant replay in sports, right? Where you can say, well, record your screen, what's happening on your screen, and then we'll watch back exactly what you did. Let's say if it was a software-based task, but video allows somebody to use those experiences as coaching opportunities as well, in a slightly safer way than standing with a clipboard behind them and watching them. It's a much more personal way to experience something, and then a usable tool for coaching and upgrading their skills.
Beyond VR, what are some of the trends that you're seeing that would either drive further video usage for training and for storytelling within organizations?
Yeah, I think more and more we get a little bit more into the social aspect of it. So how can video be used more collaboratively? I think the other way is to embed knowledge checks inside of video. So how, as part of that experience, can you pull data out of the video, or pull data out of the system that shows that they're actually learning from that video?
Yeah.
So there's ways to enhance that. I think, even the way video is recorded with 360 video and other tools that you can continually enhance that experience. That's the trend it goes. I think anytime you look at a commercial use or a commercial video software that may be out in a non-corporate provided system, all of the trends that are happening there will be trends that can be adopted inside of a company or a nonprofit use as well. So you can kind of say if those things are proven to engage people and that's what's expected of a user, that's going to show up inside of a software.
So you just talked about social engagements. Even internally, when video content and learning is distributed through the organization, you said that you can monitor the chatter on social channels on whether or not employees are engaging with the content that was just delivered to them. What are some of the guardrails that companies should consider when it comes to not only monitoring but making sure that the feedback shared on social channel is, I would say, compliance and HR appropriate?
Yeah, the compliance part of my job. I think it starts with a basic understanding of what's appropriate, and not over-engineering compliance. So most adults are responsible and can make the right decisions, and we have to trust them to do that. Where what we don't want are any kind of cultural insensitivities or anybody whose way of communicating when they're providing feedback on someone is not non-empathetic and can be perceived as negative. So the first part is trusting people to do the right thing. The second is demonstrating what the right thing is, and then ultimately there will be some enforcement when people go off the rails.
So let's talk about something that is like a concrete example. You're based in Seattle. Just earlier this week, there was an incident in a Starbucks store in Philadelphia. And Starbucks is going to shut down their stores, the 8,000 stores nationwide, for one afternoon just to train their employees on ethnicity bias and how to treat employees and customers in a fairly manner. And I would imagine that video content in that type of examples could be a good way to redirect the employees on how they should better address those challenges. What would be the process to go through that, not only to create the content, but to be able to distribute it in 8,000 different locations and make sure that not only employees are watching it, but also that employees are assimilating what the content and the instructions are about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we think about video, one thing that we should also consider is it doesn't have to be recorded. So this is an example of where streaming content or webcasting is another part of the solution, which is also something that our platform does, which is the one-to-many distribution of live content. So if you think about 8,000 retail stores, there are not 8,000 professionals trained on how to deliver that type of content. So one is live streaming or webcasting directly to those locations. Those sometimes allow you, as you've seen in other tools, to provide real-time feedback back to the team presenting, or at least capture that for what needs to be done for a follow-up. So that's one of them is the one-to-many use of video. So people can actually see the person presenting, the person that they're observing is a professional and an expert in that topic. It's not their manager reading out of a handbook or a binder. So that's one thing. But to continue that, video can also be used for more of the scenarios around whether something like cultural sensitivity or racial bias. Video is a way to create a confined vignette or scenario to demonstrate a concept. So you've got multiple ways that people are learning in that type of a situation. One is, live, actually hearing from an expert. The other is, well, how does that actually play out in real life situations? But you're making sure that everyone's getting the same content. So then you leave it up to the live events for the localization and tailoring of the messages.
It's interesting because, in the past when we had training sessions in classrooms, you had the ability to interact in real time with the trainer and ask questions, ask for clarification, and then the trainer would be able to respond to response back in real time and really to cater the response and the answer to that specific question. Now, when it comes to pre-recorded video content, you don't have that ability necessarily to provide feedback or to respond in real time. Right now, when you talk about webcasting, for instance, you have this ability to have a real-time interaction with the recipients. So what is some framework to identify what type of content or training should be pre-recorded versus something that should be delivered in real time using podcasting or webcasting, for instance?
Mm-hmm. I think anytime you're talking about learning the concepts of a particular content area, video is phenomenal, right? So you get a consistent demonstration.
Yes.
It's not up to the instructor who might have, used one example in one course that was really effective and then didn't use it at another. So now you have inconsistency from the learner perspective on the kind of core concepts of the learning. When you get to the practical application, that's, I think, where the live interaction becomes much more important, or at least the ability to provide a question or a discussion thread that can then be monitored. Because that's when you get to, well, that's great as a concept, but how do I apply that to my job? And that's where the interactivity from a webcast or a discussion thread or any other kind of social learning method is where you can continue to do that without having the formal classroom environment.
So we're getting close to the end now, and usually at this stage of the episode, I like to ask a few fun and personal questions to our guests. So the first question would be, if you were to invite someone famous to dinner, who would you pick and why?
That's always a challenging question. I think based on some things I've learned recently, I thought immediately of Julia Child, not only because she did some awesome stuff, in World War II and in France, but she could actually cook the dinner. So that would be an extra advantage. Okay,
well, talking about food, then what is the type of food that you like the most?
I always default to a good lasagna. It's something where you can throw a bunch of stuff in, and it just gets better and better the more you have in there.
Are you more of a meat lasagna guy or more of a veggie lasagna guy?
I'll take either.
Okay, all right. What was your dream job growing up as a kid?
As a kid, I had this strange fascination to be an investment banker.
Really, as a kid?
I have no idea why that was so appealing to a 10-year-old, but that was my original. My undergraduate degree was accounting, so I started that way and then switched gears.
Okay, that's an unusual response, I would say. I don't know how many kids actually dream to be an investment banker. What is your favorite vacation spot?
I think my favorite vacation spot is more of a category. Anywhere I can get into the water, other than Arctic water is great for me.
Okay, so being in Seattle, you're more of a water guy versus a mountain guy?
Yeah, we've definitely got our share of water here.
What is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
Vacations are one of the only opportunities for reading for me. So there's always a stack of books waiting for me to go on vacation.
All right, and it's paper book.
Yep.
What would be one of the most recent books that you read and that you would recommend to our listeners? Whether it's a business book or just a fictional book, whatever it might be.
Yeah, usually skim business books. There's so many of them. I've actually been into some South American writers lately, so that's my fiction fix.
Okay, and what could we spot you doing outside of work that would flabbergast your coworkers?
I think if they saw me show up riding my motorcycle one day, they would think it pretty out of character.
Oh, what type of motorcycle do you ride?
A Triumph.
Okay. And are you like a leather jacket guy or?
No leather, but definitely all the safety wear.
Okay. So what is the way for our listeners to follow you and Panopto on social media?
I am active pretty much on an hourly basis on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And then Panopto, hashtag Panopto at Panopto, Panopto.com. We're also a pretty good producer of content. So if you are interested in learning more about how to use video, we're trying to lead as a content provider there as well.
Awesome. And I will share those on the podcast notes too. Any last word of wisdom or advice?
Yeah, I think in this topic and a lot of topics, I think small companies need to realize that they can do a lot with a little. You can achieve the same outcomes on small budgets with limited technology, limited hardware, and achieve the same engagement results and outcomes as big companies.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.